have the great honor today to be with Joe Jacobi, the first American gold medal winner in whitewater canoe slalom, right? Is that correct?
That is correct. Along with my doubles canoe partner, Scott Strasbaugh, we won America's first ever Olympic gold medal. And amazingly to this day, so far the only one.
So what's so cool about Joe is we've had a chance to talk outside of here. And then, as I got to know Joe, I'm like, wow, I've got to get Joe on CultureCast because you have a lot to say, right? And there's some interesting stuff going on in our world. And now, so right now, you're American, right? But you live in Spain.
We are U.S. citizens. My family and I, my wife Lisa, our daughter Seo.
Right.
We are American citizens, and we are residents of the country of Spain.
CultureCast is all about culture. And I want to kind of lead that conversation in because you've obviously traveled a lot of places in the world.
Right.
You have some insight, and I think you've got some things here that we can really learn from. Now, after you finished your Olympic career, you were with NBC as a commentator for other Olympics as an analyst, correct?
I went to the 2008 Olympics as the canoe kayak color commentator.
Okay.
For NBC Olympics, which was a great experience.
And now you have a company called Five with Joe, right? And that's your performance coaching, executive development.
Exactly. And just actually in between the NBC gig in 2008 and what I'm doing now, I was the chief executive officer of USA Canoe Kayak, the national governing body for competitive canoeing in the United States for 5 years. And
wow.
So, that's
so you got this just incredible wealth of experience from actually being a competitor to being an analyst to being an executive, and also then to now have your own performance company. Okay. So when you and I talked the first time, right? And we were talking about like cultural mastery is all about how do we master these diverse relationships for the common good and for the highest levels of success, right?
Right.
So Scott and you both are American, right? The partner you had to win the Olympic gold medal, but you were telling me that, I don't know if it was the ages, but you were telling me you guys were very different, right?
That's correct. I think one of the biggest influences on my ideology about diversity and just different kinds of culture comes from my doubles canoe partnership with Scott. Scott was older. He had more life experience than I did, but Scott was also, he was introverted. He was very analytical. He had skills that were just so different than mine. He was a master technician in terms of paddling the canoe. And then for me, being younger, I'd say a little more wide-eyed, more optimistic, very extroverted, very outgoing. And, in a doubles canoe, in the sport of whitewater canoeing, you don't spend a lot of time paddling the singles canoe. You're in the doubles boat paddling with your partner as much as you possibly can. The more time that you have in the boat together, the more that's going to help you when you race. But that wasn't always easy. I mean, there were a lot of challenges that came with that because it's like we saw every single issue from very different viewpoints. If you kind of imagine an apple on the table, I was looking at it on one side of the table and Scott was looking at it from the other. And I think any time that you walk to the other side of the table to look at the apple, you notice, oh, wow, the lighting's different. Oh, it casts a different shadow on that side. And so that was every day for 6 years of paddling with Scott. And so it was challenging, but the biggest influence about that partnership is that when you bring diversity into the idea of performing your very best, you get those contradictory and different viewpoints that then can be sort of brought into the middle to kind of figure out what's best. And it is absolutely has never left me since those 6 years of paddling with Scott. Best thing that ever happened to me in my life.
You know what's interesting to me here is that you're talking about diversity and Scott, right?
Right.
And this is an assumption, okay?
Okay.
I'm assuming because the sport of kayak is the athletes are predominantly are white. Was Scott white,
Yes.
a white man? Okay.
Yeah.
So here's the interesting thing to me. Most people, and this is especially true in America, right?
Yes.
Diversity kind of gets put into this almost a color-based or ethnicity-based thing. But a diversity is, and culture is way beyond that. I mean, you can have two people who look very similar, who are coming from very different cultures, subcultures or backgrounds, and color really isn't the issue. It's
No,
really the difference of perspective that people have, right?
that's
So
right.
I would be curious to try to extract a few things here, and that
Let's
would
do
be,
it.
okay, so the essential thing is you got to row together, right? So I mean you got to paddle together, right? So it's not rowing, but you have to paddle together. So what were some of the lessons you learned working with somebody completely different from yourself that you think that, hey, those people who are watching this, listening to this, it could really help them as they look at mastering these diverse relationships?
So we had a wonderful sports psychologist at the U.S. Olympic Committee named Dr. Shane Murphy, who worked with us on some of these ideas, and we just called it working within the gray zone, because you need to take what's black and you need to take what's white, and we need to bring that together, and black and white make gray, and we had to kind of find those gray zones in almost everything that we did. So to kind of be very specific in the course, in the nature of whitewater canoe slalom racing, it's not just getting out on the river and paddling, but you have to be able to stand on the riverbank, look at the rapids, look at the water, understand what the water is doing, and then two people have to have agreement on what's going to happen. And so one of the things that Scott and I worked on a lot was how we would walk the course together and how we would talk to each other and how we would both put the ideas kind of into the gray area so that we could work with them there and kind of shape them for our style of canoeing and our outlook and philosophy of paddling. But then the most important thing once we got in the boat and started paddling is that we had roles in the boat. And I talk about this with executive teams, is that the role of the person in the front of the boat is very different than the person in the back.
I want to paraphrase something because it just kind of pops out to me. It's like get good with gray, right?
Yes.
Because we live in a culture. The United States is a black and white, right and wrong, moral, immoral type of mindset.
That's correct.
What you're saying is that if we're going to succeed with people who are different from ourselves, we have to get good with gray. So maybe another way to say that is, we have to get good with getting the common good, right? Not just, it's not my way, it's not your way, it's our way. How do we find that together? When we talk about, like in the 6 stages of cultural mastery, we talk about engagement, and then we move from that to empathy, and then we get to excitement, which is that vision building stage. And that's like you standing on the river. How are we going to navigate this, right? And so I love that. Get good with gray. So that there's a good blog.
And it's, well, it's just true. It's where we need to be. And I just think that, there's obviously a practice to that. Obviously if we just talk about it, it's not enough. You have to really find ways to practice that. And I think we have to be very creative in how we do that. I think that if you're someone who's kind of been very set on your own rules and your own ideals for a very long time, don't try to change this with everybody at one time. Like pick one person, pick one relationship in your life, and just begin to work and experiment with that one relationship and see what that looks like, what that feels like, what that sounds like, and kind of just listen to the way you react. And I think when you just focus like on one relationship, just as an example, if you do that for a while and that becomes your practice, then I think you'll begin to kind of become more aware and notice more often how you are in other relationships. But I think to just sort of decide you're going to take it on all at one time, it's a very hard way to do it.
It's a difficult thing. And the other thing I think sometimes people get lost in some of the semantics around culture, where people talk about, say, for example, cultural sensitivity. I'm out here saying, no, let's get cultural skill. And what you're describing there is a skill. Let's develop the skill of working with people who are different from ourselves. Now, you wrote an article recently in your blog. You have a blog that's called Sunday Morning with Joe, right?
Sunday Morning Joe, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I'm a fan, man. I'm hooked on Sunday morning show. Love it. So it's great. And I actually read these things. So I read one recently that you wrote that said, I think it's the difference between bad and difficult. Okay. And so you're talking about making this distinction. Okay. And people do this with culture. If we have a morality viewpoint of other cultures, it's wrong or we're right, or, you know, but people get into this right and wrong, this bad and good type of, and so we talk about how do we get neutral, right? And I thought your point on bad and difficult was a good one. So I want to read just a little bit about that, and then I want you to comment on it. Okay, so I'm just going to read what you wrote, because you may not remember exactly what you wrote, but I wrote it down. So let me do
I love that. Actually, I do, but please read.
Well, no,
this is great.
I'll just read this. So I wondered, and this is you writing, speaking. I wondered if I regularly and mistakenly characterize activities and people as good or bad. When I do this, I'm losing sight of what's just difficult. Am I losing sight of what is just difficult? Who is just difficult? And by difficult, I mean tricky, perhaps scary.
People say things are good or things are bad. And I think it's just becomes when you decide something isn't good and you decide it's bad, you discard it, you trash it, you get rid of it. And that is the point where I think a lot of times we're making the mistake of taking something that isn't really bad. You don't like it because it's hard. And that's just kind of one of those tough messages to hear. It's tough for all of us. And that's what I try to do with Sunday Morning Joe is I do try to find the right way to kind of talk about tough messages. Let's just try to pay attention to the difference between bad and difficult. And if it's difficult, don't ship it. Don't get rid of it.
People avoid a lot of times these diverse relationships. And for them, it's almost like they're bad. But it's really just difficult. And over time, the skill can be developed.
It absolutely, look, any problem that was built by humans can be deconstructed by humans as well. And that problem was built by humans. This idea of not liking a culture or a person or something based on a cultural difference. This is not like something that was someone waved a wand and said, this is it. This problem was created by human beings. So it can be deconstructed by human beings. Doesn't mean it's easy.
Right.
It just means it's difficult.
Right. Okay. So recently, and you were an NBC Olympic analyst. So recently there was an analyst in the games in South Korea who was fired by NBC because the guy's name is Joshua Cooper Ramo, right? And he was fired because he was supposed to be an Asian expert, right? This is his field. And he made a comment about how the South Koreans were so admirous and thankful to the Japanese for their example and their help in economic development and recovery, without mentioning the 5 years of tyranny that the Japanese had over South Korea from 1940 to 1945. And it created a big uproar in South Korea. And he was let go. He was let go as an analyst. We're living, and I want to get to a question for you, because we're living in days where, I mean, if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing as it relates to culture today, I mean, you can derail your career pretty quickly. People are pretty unforgiving right now. What advice do you have to our listeners as it regards when they're out there commenting or dealing with or engaging with a new culture to keep themselves kind of in a safe zone, you know, where they don't tip it over, right? And you know, they've got to go through some education. They've got to learn to engage and stuff. But what advice do you have? It's just as they're going through the process of learning to work with people who are very different from themselves, and not at the same time screw it up so bad that they get fired or really hurt themselves.
Well, Ricardo, I think the biggest thing for me, I know this is going to sound unbelievably simplistic, but people need to listen. We're living in this, you open up Facebook, what's the question? I think it's what's on your mind.
Yes.
That's the question that Facebook is. It's not telling you, hey, what are you hearing here now that you're here? It's saying, what do you have to say? Everybody, you know, I'm going to hold up my cell phone. This is that machine is its own media machine. I can do podcasts, I can do videos, I can broadcast my message to the world. It's a speaking machine. And all of these applications are asking you, what is on your mind? What do you, Ricardo, have to say? None of them are saying, hey, Ricardo, what are you hearing today? I think that if we just relax a little bit, we've got time to talk. We've got time to state what's on our mind. I just think, what would be wrong with a little bit more listening, with a little bit more learning, with a little bit more reading, with a little bit more watching, and not being in such a rush just to say, oh, I got to state my mind. I gotta say my piece. Are you sure about that? I don't know. Before you do, what might happen if you listen first, if you listen to some other ideas, some other viewpoints, especially with some opposing viewpoints, things that kind of feel different to you.
But the challenge there, Joe, is that can shake someone to the core of their being, because if their whole sense of self-identity is tied to their culture, the way that they believe, the way that life operates for them, right? And now I open myself up to another way of thinking or another type of life or another culture, which you've done in Spain, right? And it fundamentally changes you. I would argue for the good, right?
Of course. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area in the greatest performance environment in the history of our sport, where the door was completely open to international athletes who wanted to come and paddle with us on the Potomac River. Like, this would be the equivalent of, say you were a basketball player and you wanted to go practice every day with Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, and be coached by Phil Jackson. Any athlete from Europe, any canoeing athlete from another country could come and put their boat on the Potomac River, and our workouts were as open to those people as they were to any American athlete. This is just how I've been brought up, and I know what the impact is of this on my lifestyle. I can't. The hardest thing for me, Ricardo, I would say, is empathizing with the people that maybe, as you say, are kind of maybe hanging on to something that feels so scary to let go of. But it's like, well, every time I've let go of something, gosh, something unbelievably new and special and beautiful has come into my life. Every time I've done that, it's always the result. I would be scared not to continue to change, evolve, learn, and grow. That would scare me more than anything at this point in my life.
Well, that's inspiring. And we have a lot of people set in their ways, and that's true of people on the right and people on the left and everybody in between. Right. So I want to ask you a difficult question. Okay. And then we'll kind of wrap up here. And this is kind of a tough area, but you were CEO of the USA Canoe and Kayak. And recently, the United States Gymnast Association have had some horrible scenarios with abuse of young women. There's a Dr. Larry Nassar, but other people have fallen through this as well. And there's an ongoing investigation with Michigan State University and all kinds of stuff. From your perspective, as a former Olympian, as an executive at the highest levels in sport, what needs to happen to ensure a culture where this can't happen?
It's the right question to ask, first of all. I mean, it's a hard question because there's not exactly one answer, but I'm at this stage, I'll just tell you how I feel today. I wrote this in a recent post, that my belief is that the only way that we sort of, on a really big issue like the one that we're talking about, is that it can't feel like you're working on like a 50-point plan all at one time with everyone in the Olympic movement. This Olympic movement, the one in the United States, has to choose like a single keystone habit to work on as an organization. And I think it's respect. I think respect comes before everything. It becomes before winning. It becomes before performing. It becomes before just everything. If you just put respect first and you figure out how to break that down into little pieces so that it from the people who lead to the people who serve to the people who compete to the people who coach, that the biggest thing that you're going to pay a huge price for if you screw up is if you're not respectful at any level. That's the kind of change I think it's going to take. I do want to say that when it comes to, I think, people who have made mistakes time after time after time after time, whether it's the Olympic movement or in business, I'm not sure that they deserve that chance to continue to lead and figure that out. I mean, I think the Olympic movement in this country is in dire need of new and different kind of leadership. Like, I don't think this group necessarily deserves that chance to implement the change that's needed. I think it will probably take an act of Congress to come in and to really look at the issues that have happened at Michigan State with gymnastics, with swimming, with the U.S. Olympic Committee. And then I think we'll be in a position to figure out who are the kind of leaders that we need, what is the right habits for the organization. But I think that's where it starts. I mean, we need something, just one single thing that the entire Olympic movement can hang its hat on and ultimately be held accountable for. That if that respect piece doesn't happen, it's just a no questions asked. You're gone. You're done. It's a privilege. It is such a privilege not to just be in the Olympic Games, but just to train for the games. The life lessons that you learn, the relationships that you get, not just at the Olympics or the Olympic trials, but all the little training camps and races and interactions that happen along the way. That's the good stuff. And to me, you shouldn't, if you can't play the game of respect, it's just, this isn't the right place for you. I mean, I think the more people that get serious about that keystone habit of respect, I think that's where we really begin to, when we talk about the 6 points of cultural mastery, it has to respect. It's a game of respect.
Yeah. Our sixth stage is actually endearment. We love each other and we sacrifice for each other for the common good.
Right.
Which is kind of getting into that gray, right? And it's this process to that. You what you just said is heartfelt, and obviously you've thought it out. As you were talking about, perhaps the present leadership shouldn't be the ones to lead that transformation.
Right.
Something came to my mind that we teach in cultural mastery, and that is you cannot lead external transformation until you've first been transformed internally. And so for those leaders who kind of led that organization and entity into a bad place, right? For them to even be able to think about possibly leading in the future or even have that consideration, they would need an internal transformation as it regards culture, respect, as you're describing it, the way that we work with people. And this also goes, this goes to this whole kind of Me Too thing. Which the male-female cultures in sport are different, and the respect has not been there. There's no question about that. And this certainly, it speaks to the whole thing. And we need a cultural transformation, but cultural transformation can only be led by people who have been transformed themselves, right? And so.
Ricardo, just want to share kind of one other idea from a Sunday Morning Joke post that I recently wrote on this issue. It's called Expect Respect. And the way I tell, and I think this is really important for executives and leaders to hear this, that we're always kind of bringing people around our figurative tables in life. The kind of tables where you hold meetings, the kind of tables where we have meals together, the kind of tables where we're supposed to exchange ideas. And we get very caught up in the strategy and the tactics and what the ideas are going to be, what the conversations are going to be. But I just wonder how often we look around who the people are that have showed up at our table, either by design or by luck. And you begin to wonder how many of them really feel whole as a human being at the table. How many of them, if 100% is whole, how many of them feel 100%? And I think that the new definition of respect for me, as I look at my figurative table in my life, the people I invite to come sit at my table or the tables that I am invited to sit at with others, that if there are people that are less than 100%, it's like everything else stops until we get into something that's moving that person back in the right direction. And if the respect is there, it will move in that direction. And that is kind of the new definition of respect for me. It's like, are you willing to shut down the other stuff to then focus on the people who are at your table and make them better?
Well, we're going to have to come back and have another conversation and another time.
Let's do it.
You're a fascinating guy, Joe Jacobi. And so let me, if I may, just anybody who may want to follow you or engage with you, it's joejacobi.com, right? I mean,
that is right. JOEJACOBI.com. And at the joejacobi.com website, you can actually sign up for Sunday Morning Joe for free. I write it every Sunday. It's always a post about doing your best, improving your performance, overcoming challenge, aligning with purpose. And it's like,
I'm going to vouch. It's great stuff. And I'm hard to impress, man. And I read a lot. And I don't sign up for a lot of stuff, but outside of, my friends and my family, I mean, Sunday Morning Joe is the love of my life. I love writing it. I write about things that I need to write about for myself. And I'm just amazed at the response on Sundays. It started out as an email. Like you. It's just, it's just real, right? So you just write.
It is.
Sense that it's not this highly filtered, highly edited. It's like you talking. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
This has been great. We will do it again. I look forward to it.